So I'm here today with part one of a two-part series interview with producer Iain Hutchison from Glowworm Recording in Glasgow. Welcome, Iain.
Hi there, Pete.
Nice to see you on here. And I thought we would run a little kind of podcast style interview because lots of people want to know a little bit more about the album Not an Island, with it being released on the 24th of April, coming up incredibly soon. I thought it would be amazing for you guys who are listening to get to know Iain a little bit more, and we could chat about the album, what happened behind the scenes, maybe some things that you just don't realize happens in the studio, and some highlights, lowlights, etc. So I'm going to crack on with some questions, but first of all, Iain, could you briefly just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, particularly in your role as producer and engineer?
Great, yeah. So my name's Iain. I live up here in Glasgow. I've been here my whole working life. I work as a music producer, a musician and a sound engineer, which basically means I help people make albums in various different capacities. I run my own studio here, Glowworm Recording. We've got 2 studios in the building, so I'm not the only engineer working here. We've got a kind of hub of folks working here now. And yeah, I spend my days making albums with folks, anything from working with a band who are kind of fully ready to go and play live together, to working with an individual singer or musician, creating tracks, pulling in session musicians, varies day by day, or even just mixing stuff that I haven't recorded for other people as well, getting sent the files and doing mixing work here.
That's fantastic. And it's an amazing complex you've got in Glasgow, right in the centre of town. Yeah. Can you just tell people, because people, when you know, you say, oh, as an artist, I'm writing an album, I'm recording an album, you know, it's certainly not one guy having a go at writing it in my case. I really rely on a team of people. So what was your kind of role in this album?
So I guess the role of the producer is really to help steer the whole creative ship. The whole point is to get the album to the end point of realising the full artistic vision of the artist. So the kind of key thing for me as a producer is it's not about applying my own vision to a project necessarily. It's about hearing what the artist, in this case Pyramid Park, is trying to achieve, where they're trying to go, what kind of sound they're trying to get, what kind of feeling or emotion or spirituality even they're wanting to put across. And helping make that possible. It's like being the conduit to actually get that thing captured onto our recording. So that's anything from the practicalities of kind of making a recording session run, to helping with creative decisions, kind of pointing out where things maybe aren't working, and just always being another set of listening ears in the room. So if things are going really well, sometimes you hang back as a producer and you just let the artist do their thing. Sometimes you just step in and it's just about making little course corrections to help get to that final point of the vision.
It's an incredible serving role, isn't it, when you look at it from the big perspective? Because I find as an artist, you know, the relationship with a producer is the make or break for any recording.
Sure.
I'd be really interested to know, this is the second album that we've worked on together. Maybe you can let me know what's been the key differences between the 2 projects. The first project was called Vulnerability, which was released in 2017. Much of the recording was 2016. And then Not an Island has been recorded 2019, released 2020.
Yeah. Well, I would say the biggest thing really that's different this time round is that we've got to know each other. And actually that makes a huge difference, not only in terms of relationally in the studio, but creatively as well. So, you know, with the first album, we were kind of figuring each other out and, you know, figuring out what our strengths were and what each of us brought to the table. At the same time, actually, we were also, I think, with that first album, trying to find the sound of Pyramid Park.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so what we talked about before starting the album in terms of where it might go, in some ways was very different to where it did end up going. But I think it probably realised the fullness of the vision and the seed that was there all along. But this time round, I would say it was much easier this time, because actually we had in album 1 started to define and discover the sound of Pyramid Park. And this time we were just running with that and extending that and building upon that platform. And creatively and relationally, it was much easier because we already kind of knew each other. We know how to work together. We know what each of us brings. So we were able to kind of just flow more easily day by day in the studio.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Absolutely. I felt we had a real confidence in the way that we were able to execute ideas as well. And less of, you know, I don't feel you're particularly like this, but I was a lot more tentative in the first project, and I found it a lot easier to be able to communicate what I wanted and even just make mistakes more freely, which then led to better ideas, I think, on the longer term.
Sure.
We worked as a small team. There were only 4 of us actually recording on the project, plus some additional vocal guests. How did that approach help us?
Yeah, so I guess I would say it's again about efficiency and about focus. When we were doing the drums and bass, the band tracking sessions with Fermi and Henry involved there, it was great to kind of have a few more of us in the studio because you get a bit of a buzz, you get kind of creative ideas bouncing off each other, and that's really good at that in sort of inception phase. But actually, the efficiency of it just being the 2 of us and the focus of it just being the 2 of us for most, if not all, of the overdubbing actually was really helpful because, you know, as I've said already, we kind of knew how each other worked. We knew kind of what each of us were able to bring. So we could just be really focused in kind of throwing ideas backwards and forwards, and you're not kind of like diluting that by kind of engaging a wider group of people. So, I mean, sometimes a big crowd can be great, but there's just something about getting into your own little world and putting the blinkers on and just going for it creatively. So
yeah, I love that. We would have, if you can picture it, there's the control room with like the main desk in the middle front of the room, and then you have on one side to the left like 2 or 3 keyboards set up ready to go, like different synths, and then on the right hand side you've got the cab, the bass cab, and you've got the guitar pedals all set up. And it was great to be able to walk in there and just be able to go, basically.
Yeah, you're just jumping around between different things, and just the point with the studio is it's supposed to be kind of a creative space. It's a creative palette, and all those things are just tools. They're like instruments there to help you kind of realize your creative vision. And so you just want all that stuff to be out the way mentally, so that you're not, you know, losing time or losing a creative spark by trying to set something up or figure something out. You're just ready to go.
Yeah, I agree. And I love that. We had a really clear conversation early on, even before I raised the money via Kickstarter, to kind of chat through. I came up for the day, didn't I, to record the video at the studio for Kickstarter. And I remember that we sat down and we chatted about the kind of vision of the project if the money was raised, and I played a few reference tracks to you even then. Those references really served us well during the whole recording. What tones did you try to replicate, and from which songs?
I would say there's an extent to which it's not about replicating tones, but actually references are really helpful. I feel like you have to be careful how you use them, but at the same time they can be really, really valuable. So I would use references to get us excited, to get us inspired, like a springboard for an idea. But it's like you jump off that and you go and create your own unique thing. So the references are really helpful, as you mentioned, at the kind of early stage, because talking about music can be very abstract. You know, it's that old quote, talking about music is like dancing about architecture. It's like it doesn't make sense in a sense, because you're using these subjective terms. You know, I want it warmer, I like it when it sounds thicker, I like it when it sounds whatever, you know, and these words actually can mean different things to different people. So the references help to put a kind of a marker in the ground. This is the sort of thing I'm thinking, or I really like the drums on that recording, or I really like the way the vocals sort of flies over the track on that recording. And they help kind of create a mutual field of reference. And in that sense, it was really helpful. I would say, though, that I was really inspired by a lot of the sounds from the latest Foals record.
Yes.
Called Part 1, Everything Not Saved Will Be Lost. Produced, I think, by the band and Brett Shaw in 123 Studios in London, and mixed by Mark Spike Stent. I think a great team on that, and a really incredible sounding record. Yeah. So I guess if I was referencing stuff, sometimes it was that album, just the weight and the punch, but the warmth as well of the drums, particularly on that album, really excited and inspired me, and I was using that as a yardstick. So I kind of come back to references again when I'm mixing. Yeah. Try not to rely on them too much, because I just think there's something so creatively releasing about not being looking over your shoulder and actually just doing your own thing, even if it sounds very different to other things. But at the same time, there can be a certain point in the mixing process where it's really helpful just to see where you've got to compared to everything else that's out there, and stuff that you know in an objective day when you're not been listening to music all day sounds good. And it helps you to kind of see where you're up to, and it might get you really excited about where you've landed, or you might go, whoa, my ears have got a bit skewed over the last couple of hours and I've ended up going down a rabbit hole that's not helpful. So I would use that again in that point in the process to kind of, and it pushes me as well, I suppose, because you can think you've done enough, and then you listen to other stuff that's out there and you're like, that feels bolder, that feels more exciting, yet actually I'm going to put that reference away and I'm going to dig in and go the next level, push it even further in the mix now and see if that does something good for it.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly for those who don't understand mixing versus just the tracking of a record.
Yeah.
It would be really interesting for people to hear, quickly what it is, but also your different approach to it, because I remember listening back to one of the songs on the album called Surrender, and the first time I heard it was quite late at night, and I had my headphones on. I remember exactly where I was sitting listening to it, and by the end of the song I was in tears, and I've never ever had that experience before, listening back to a mix from just it being recorded to then the first mix. It was an incredibly amazing experience for me. But what does that talk us through that process a little bit so that people can understand that a little bit further?
Sure. Okay. So when we're recording to multitrack, which means that every sound or every element is recorded kind of separately. And what that means is that you have individual control over those different elements. So there, in the case of your album, it was different sounds in different rooms at different times.
Yeah.
So, we had the drums in a room, and I had microphones on all the different elements of the drums, the bass drum, the snare, the toms, the hi-hats, mics in the room to capture that. And they're all going to different channels of recording so that actually you can control those sounds independently of each other. And then we add bass, we add guitars, keys, vocals, all these different things. And again, they're all on their own track or channel. So when you come to the end of the recording process, you have kind of a rough balance you've been listening to, where you've got the different levels of all these different sounds kind of balanced so you can hear things. But when we get to mixing, that's when you're basically distilling down all of that to just left and right, 2 channels.
Wow.
For us to listen in stereo. So the whole process is about folding everything down. You may have some of our bigger songs had maybe 200 tracks on them by the time we were finished, because there's maybe 16 channels on the drums, and then there's maybe a second drum part going over the top, so that's another 16, and then every guitar has 2 mics on it, and so on and so on. It adds up very quickly, and you're boiling that down. It's kind of like baking as well. You're taking all the ingredients, you're mixing them together, and then you're putting them in the oven, and actually it comes out as no longer you can see the flour and the sugar separately. It's one thing. It's a cake baked together. So that's in an abstract way. You see what I mean about dancing about architecture, though. Trying to use words to describe what we do is a bit awkward sometimes.
It's tricky, isn't it?
But what we're doing essentially is, when I'm mixing, you can set a level balance. So you can go, okay, do I want the bass guitar louder? Do I want the bass drum louder? Then you can set tonal balance as well. So the thing that really inspired me about those Foles records was the kind of the low end weight of the bass drum in the drum kit sounds, but in a way that it was really present. So present is normally a word you would use to describe the higher end of the frequency spectrum, but so somehow the bass drums were really clear, but really punchy in a way that kind of hits you in the chest as well. And I was kind of enjoyed exploring that a bit with the drum sounds to try and get that weight in a track that really anchors it. So that's about like boosting the bass frequencies in the bass drum, maybe pulling back some other frequencies, finding the place where the bass drum knocks, if you know what I mean, so that you can actually hear it in amongst a dense track.
Yeah.
So level, equalization. Then the third thing is compression, which is a bit of a studio dark art, I suppose, but it's about changing the dynamic range, the loud to soft of a sound, and you can use it as a technical thing to control something, but also you can use compression very much artistically. So a lot of what we do in the studio is about like running a sound through a box to actually change the sound on an artistic level, to try and impart a different character to it, to make it sound more urgent, to make it sound more relaxed sometimes, to make it sound more kind of full spectrum, rich sounding in different ways. So I'm applying different tones, different boxes, different pieces of software to the sound, basically to change the character. Oftentimes as well, adding grit, adding more distortion. Not necessarily so that it sounds distorted, but so that it sounds richer, fuller, or more exciting in different ways. So there's a huge amount of creative space in mixing, and that's before you even get to effects, adding like delays, reverbs, space to a sound, or purposefully making something really dry so it's really upfront. And you can go down the rabbit hole and spend hours, which I often do, because it's a journey of exploration. It's kind of the most creative part of my job, is when you start to paint with all the sounds that you've got and actually make it into something that is a homogeneous whole, but is exciting as well.
What is your favourite song on the album?
That's a tough question to answer, because there's several, I would say.
I still don't know what mine is.
So there's several for different reasons. I would say Bitterness is definitely up there for me. I think when we discovered the chorus and post-chorus of that song, how it kind of just explodes with the different guitar effects that we used and the way that it works in counterpoint with the bass, and then we added the Juno arpeggiator to that. That became a moment that I was really kind of just loved, and it excited me and inspired me every time I heard it. I would say Envy is up there as well. Again, just a lot of different creative layers in that song, and I like... I remember in the pre-production how kind of challenging that was to kind of find a shape for that song, because it's like it didn't fit a normal structure, but I've grown to really love that about it. So there's a lot of detail in the way it's been pieced together, but it doesn't sound complicated when you listen to it. I just love the way it weaves in and out, and it's got a lot of attitude and a lot of energy.
It's really jerky in the verses, and then it really opens up in the bridge, doesn't it?
Sure, absolutely. Still going on a list of favourites, I would put Surrender on there as well. I think the same as you, when that one was finished, I was just kind of sat back and thought, wow, this has really worked out into something quite powerful. And I kind of keep coming back to Never Let Me Down as well. Interestingly, it was one that I was less sure about how good I'd got it when I was working on it. And then when I heard the mix back kind of away from the studio, I listened to it in my car that night, and I was like, oh yeah, great, this feels quite exciting. And then when I heard the master back, I was absolutely blown away, and I thought, okay, right, we've got something quite special in our hands here. And now that I've listened to that and seen other people's reactions when they've heard that as well, that's one I'm really proud of as well, just in terms of how immediate it is, but how much detail there is in the different layers and sounds that are there.
It feels like a true single, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and without a doubt.
I remember you saying to me, which was a real compliment, it feels like the complete package. It gets to the point quickly. The instrumentation's really interesting. The master, the mixing is spot on. The songwriting is strong. And that was a co-write with Fermi, so I can't take all the credit for that. Definitely, it was a real team effort, but it's amazing how some songs just do that. I think for me, probably my favourite song, if I have to pick one, is probably Surrender, partly because it's the journey that I've been on as well, so it's got a lot of personal meaning to me, but again, it's the song that really moved me the first time I heard the mixes back, as I've said earlier.
Great.
So I'm glad that you kind of picked that one out.
Cool.
So what was your favourite day of recording or mixing, and why?
I would say, I imagine my answer to this might be the same as yours, actually. So I love the whole process, but I would say there was 2 days that stood out for me, which were the very last 2 days of recording that we did. When we were in Studio 2 here, we were in the little room, and we were tearing apart 2 tracks that had previously felt like 2 of the weaker ones, but we knew they had the potential to be 2 of the stronger tracks. And just the buzz of seeing those things start to, going from a place where I was like, yeah, this is okay, to being like, oh, wow, I'm really excited about this. I'm really inspired. And then the ideas started flowing, and just those were like the perfect days in the studio, just watching songs evolve. And by the end of the day, you've got something that you stand back and think, wow, where did that come from?
Yeah.
It was amazing. So
it really was. I would say the second from last day when we cracked open I Know.
Yeah.
That for me was my favorite day of the whole process, without a doubt. And I was really scared of losing that song, because I thought, if we can't get it in this, we gave ourselves a day for each song, didn't we? And there was a real fear of, oh my goodness, what happens if we let this one drop? But
yeah, absolutely.
We got there. I'm going to ask you one final question for this part one of the interview, and then we're going to do a second part as well for the listeners. So do look out for that second part if you're listening to this. We started the project in June 2019 with pre-production. You came down here to Cambridge in my little room, and we worked for 2.5 days on it. And the project ended effectively in November. Let's not talking about mastering, but how did this help or hinder the project?
Yeah, I would say it probably helps the project to have a level of spread in the process. It's nice to be in a blinkered creative headspace. And in that sense, the idea of just doing a project in a month straight where you're just in every day can feel quite appealing, but actually practically and mentally, you can often not get the best from it when you're doing that. I don't think you get the most efficiency from that. I also don't think you necessarily get the best creatively from that. So just those gaps between the sessions, you're not even necessarily actively thinking about the tracks, but there's a level at which everything's just settling in your mind, and you're kind of stewing over ideas and even just headspace from things, So actually, to give it a really intense push for 3 days, getting the drums and the bass down and the real kind of foundational form of the songs in July, and then to not come back to it again until September actually is great, because you have a mental space, and then you come in fresh and you're excited and you're inspired and ready to go. And it also means if you have a bad day, it's not like, well, we're just going to have to keep going till we get this. You can go, okay, we'll put that away, and maybe we'll come back to that in the next session, and there might be a week's break in between times, and oftentimes just that stepping away and coming back is actually all it needs.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah. You used to say to me, go home, but don't listen to the songs.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I was like, oh no, I really want to hear it. And I did a little, but then you put it away, and you're right, your ears are a lot fresher. And I remember one time coming off a flight, because I used to fly up and then come straight to the studio, normally in quite an early morning flight. And there was one morning in particular where just everything was clicking. I was playing guitar, and I'm not naturally that confident as a studio session guitarist. So it was a real win to just come fresh. Even though I was physically tired, my fingers were ready and my mind was ready. And it was a really special morning, I seem to remember.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think just as much as creatively we can get into that headspace where you just want to go and go and go, and we certainly did some long days and some later nights, but there's definitely a power in kind of taking a break, taking a rest within the rhythm of how you work. And actually, I think that ultimately kind of releases the creativity. It's like your creative mind is going in the background, whether you're even thinking about it or not. And so when you step away from it, you're giving it time to just kind of stew and ruminate a bit more. And then you kind of can surprise yourself sometimes when you come back, and something you were completely stuck on before can just wide open for you, and it becomes really easy the next time. So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Iain. Really appreciate you doing this first interview for us. Look out for part 2. Before you go, can you just point people to your website or your social media?
Sure, absolutely. So on Instagram, we have Glowworm Recording at Glowworm Recording. That's GLOWORM Recording, all one word. That's the studio. Myself is at Iain Hutch Music. And Iain is IAIN.
Don't get that wrong.
Yep. That's that's the one that always catches people. The studio has a website, www.glowwormrecording.com, the same as the Instagram handle. But we're kind of mostly present on the social media, really, posting session pictures and things that we're up to there.
Great. Thanks so much, Iain. Take care.
Thank you. Cheers.